Welcome to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Fear not, dear listeners. Co-pilot Pearson and I will be back with a bang next week on Thursday the 22nd of January. But to keep you sane and warm in the meantime, this is the last instalment of our Best of 2025 Cockpit Stowaways to remind you of some of last year's madness here on planet Earth. As Panto season geared up in November, I decided to put on my tutu and point the rockets of right thinking towards the world of contemporary dance. Scottish-born Rosie Kay enjoyed a highly successful international career as a performer, and in 2004 established the Rosie Kay Dance Company, which won funding from the Arts Council and elsewhere, staging productions across the world. Then, in December 2021, despite multiple awards and rave reviews, Rosie Kay resigned from the Rosie Kay Dance Company after she was, in her own words, cancelled by members of my own cast of dancers at a dinner party in my own house, having stood up for the rights of biological women and the need for single-sex spaces. Rosie says her dancers lodged a grievance with the company's board, with her directors then putting her through 2 arduous investigations, which she says made her tenure impossible. Rosie Kay has since set up the campaign group Freedom in the Arts to emphasise artistic excellence over identity politics, along with Denise Famy, who herself won a tribunal against her former employer, the Arts Council, after she was found to have been harassed by fellow staff. For her gender-critical beliefs, and with so-called cancel culture still rife across the arts, I started by asking Rosie Kay how old she was when she realised that she was good enough to dance for a living.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, according to family legend, I danced before I could speak. And I'm not sure how true that is, but I honestly don't remember life without dancing in it. And I kind of took up ballet when I was very little. And I immediately just adored it, just loved it, loved all the imaginative side. And I suppose took it very seriously right through the difficult teenage years and didn't really think that you could do it as a job. Like I really didn't. And I realised I'd kind of missed the boat on going to ballet school. I'd grown too tall. But then I discovered this art form called contemporary dance. And I realised that you could do a dance form that combined like history and politics and art and music and everything. And you could dance in your own way. And so that's when I sort of thought, right, I'm going to try and see if I can do this properly, and applied to London Contemporary Dance School and got in, and still thought, wow, well, I'll just give this a go and I probably won't ever work, but at least, you know, it's really interesting. And amazingly got a job before I'd even left college. So I danced for 4 or 5 years abroad mostly, almost gave it up. Kind of life went off in different directions. You know, it's a tough profession. And then came back to the UK and decided that I'd follow my dream, which was to become a choreographer. So I've been based back in the UK, 22 years now, and building my work up from scratch, really, up to a whole regularly funded organisation, of which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
You're pretty good at it, to say the least. You were, as you say, educated in contemporary dance. You've held posts at the University of Oxford linked to dance. You founded the Rosie Kay Dance Company. You've done some really incredible things. Your production, 5 Soldiers, back in 2015, really took the dance world by storm. It was an incredible coup for you.
Yeah.
When did it start to go wrong? You've got this life in dance. You've got your own production company. You're obviously financially pretty canny, if I may say so. You're making a proper living out of this, and you're employing lots of people.
Yes.
When did it start to go wrong?
Yes, I was really proud of that. I was really proud of sort of building up something from scratch. I did lots of mentoring. I did lots of bringing on the next generation of dancers. I was particularly interested in like helping female dancers and choreographers really get, you know, noticed and on the big stages. I was really proud of being a female choreographer. My heroines were people like Martha Graham. There's like a history in contemporary dance of like really strong, rebellious artists, male and female, but particularly female. And I almost felt like that was my duty, I suppose. Like, if I'm going to do something as crazy as dance, let's really go for it and let's do it properly. So I kind of was attracted to subject matter that maybe scared the living Jesus out of me sort of thing. So I looked at war, and that led me to training with the 4th Battalion, the Rifles, like seeing how the body is trained for war. Being a bit of an idiot, I didn't realise it was an all-male infantry battalion when I joined. I looked at religion, I looked at cults, I explored eating disorders. So I was kind of like always trying to look for like where the zeitgeist was going. I was very interested in like sort of picking up cultural trends before they came mainstream. So I'd say like MK Ultra, my work on sort of pop stars and the Illuminati and conspiracy theory. I was kind of quite ahead of the game on that stuff. So I saw the transgender stuff coming over the hill towards me. And more, I started to get this kind of sense of dread. Once I'd looked into it and figured out what was going on and saw the deep and dark threat that it caused possibly to women's rights, I kind of thought, this is going to be something I'm not going to be able to shut up about. And I didn't shut up about it. But I suppose it just came for me. I was quite a good target, because if you could shut me up, a little bit like Sharon Davies in sport, if you can shut me up, you're shutting probably quite a strong woman in the arts.
You are a big figure. You're one of the leading contemporary dancers in this country, in the world, and you've got a commercial framework that you've built with your own bare hands. You're employing people. And how did it feel when your own dance company, people you've been mentoring, turned against you? It's a bit like, Harry Potter turns against J.K. Rowling. We've seen that happen, haven't we?
That's right. And I really, really sympathise with J.K. Rowling on that, because actually you're trying to warn people that you care about that there is a dark side to this. This isn't the same as homophobia in the 80s or something like that. This is coming from a very different place. And I'd done my research. I knew my stuff. I'm renowned for my deep research methodologies, like with the School of Anthropology at Oxford. I don't come at things willy-nilly or knee-jerk. I really go and explore and think about things.
So how did it happen that you were cancelled at your own dinner party in your own house? How did you feel? What was the straw that broke the camel's back with your extremely politically oversensitive former colleagues?
Well, they were a cast of young dancers. I'd known some of them for quite a long time. I'd mentored them when they were younger. They were young there. They'd had a terrible time with COVID. Some of them hadn't really graduated properly. And we were doing this massive, large-scale production of Romeo and Juliet on one of the biggest stages in Europe with a 48-piece orchestra. The pressure was immense, and the COVID rules had made it really weird. We were all being recorded during our working day in case there were COVID lapses. We had to wear masks all the time. And when you're dealing with like big subject matter like Romeo and Juliet, and I was basing it on gangs and gang culture in Birmingham, murders, suicide, you name it. It's really emotional, and it's big and it's deep. And they were acting just kind of quite strange. I now realise they were probably like scoring points against me for misgendering. And I hadn't realised, but there was a bit of an atmosphere. I thought it was just COVID. So I invited them to my house. I made all sorts of like different variations that were gluten-free, vegetarian, pescatarian. We had a lovely dinner. It was we were drinking lots of wine. They asked what my next show was. And I was about a year into preparing a new version of Virginia Woolf's novel Orlando, so a dance version of Orlando, which is a really fabulous short book by Virginia Woolf where a male poet becomes female, kind of inexplicatory. And I thought it could really be an amazing vehicle to kind of look at bodies and male and female behaviours and all the rest of it. Like it was a way to frame this whole gender debate. And then they were like, well, is that going to be played by a trans person? And I was like, well, actually, I don't know. It's just got to be somebody really convincing. They could be both male and female. I just find this really fascinating. It's a whole thing about behaviours and body language. And then I was just asked outright about my views. And I told them, I suppose I didn't even know the language of being gender critical at that point. Yeah. I just said that I believed that women were real and women's rights were hard fought for and really important in some circumstances, whether women are vulnerable. And really all hell broke loose. And they argued with me and I tried to explain. I opened up about like nearly dying in childbirth and, just tried to really appeal to them emotionally. But when I went back to the studio on the Monday morning, the atmosphere was horrific. And it's impossible to try and create and finish a work when people are really hostile. It was awful. So I asked my board to step in, and little did I know that set off a whole nother process of my board putting me under multiple investigations. And I can feel my voice going already. It was very harrowing. It
Multiple
was very upsetting.
investigations. You've
Multiple
set up this
investigations.
incredible company. You're giving these kids in the incredibly competitive world of contemporary dance, that you're giving them the opportunity to perform on a massive stage with your imprimatur. And you're a pretty modest person, it seems to me, Rosie. You're a huge name in the world of contemporary dance. It's ridiculous.
Well, the kids got encouraged. There's no question. They got encouraged by my management. And I think there was some sort of really nasty plan to kind of shut me up and stop being controversial. I think people kind of saw the way the climate was going. So did I. And I was willing to be brave and go straight headlong into it and make art about it. And other people in management thought that that was a very bad idea. So I think the young people, I'm not saying I'd forgive them, tomorrow, but I do think they were manipulated. I'm actually more let down and angry still with the board and the management who allowed this to happen and really were very cruel, because these were people that had been at my wedding, at my son's christening, and me saying, well, hang on, this is Rosie Kay Dance Company telling Rosie Kay that she's not allowed to think or talk about subject matter. This doesn't make any sense. So I would put the blame more on the leadership, actually.
And what's happened since? This was all in 2021, right?
Yes.
What's happened since? Are you still dancing? Have you been able to ply your trade? What's happened to Rosie Kay Dance Company?
Well, it is one of those stories that I'm finally probably at the place 4 years later where I can say, maybe it was a blessing in disguise, maybe it really helped me navigate this difficult time in the arts in a way that very few people can. I've learned so much. I still have a dance company. It's called K2 Co. We still tour. I was on stage this year performing. It was amazing. And I co-founded an organisation called Freedom in the Arts. We support artists and we fight against cancellation. We do research, we give policy advice, and we campaign really just for the protection of arts and freedom in the arts, and maybe depoliticising the institutions and the organisations that should be protecting art and artists.
And to what extent has the whole gender question, which will send many Planet Normal listeners just round the bend, they just don't understand what the fuss is about, a lot of them. To what extent is that still a part of your life, Rosie? Is it formed part of your work, or have you, having been massively bruised by this, have you sort of stepped back from that part of the public debate?
So I kind of realised early on that transgenderism was part of an authoritarianism that was spreading across the arts particularly. And it was about kind of forcing ideological beliefs into things that were, until 5 minutes ago, fairly logical. So transgenderism is one of them, but there's also like critical race theory, there's climate change, there's the war in the Middle East. These are all like really hot topics where you're only allowed one viewpoint. And if you even question it, you're in trouble, aren't you? Yeah. So I suppose I've widened out further. I think the For Women Scotland has really helped. I think that war has almost been won. Things I'm kind of fascinated
Which led to the Supreme Court ruling, we should say, the Supreme Court ruling about the importance of sexual identity rather than gender identity.
Well, it's just the definition of biological sex. So yeah, I think since the Supreme Court ruling for Women Scotland, it's a lot clearer what the definition of biological sex is. However, something I'm quite interested in is this kind of like zombie scaffolding that's been left, that's through administration and HR, and you get a lot in the arts, you get a lot in academia, and that's kind of holding up these policies that are, I think it's fair to say, unlawful. And so again, at Freedom in the Arts, we're looking at that. We're looking at court cases. We've got a pre-protocol letter in to one large umbrella organisation. We're going to have to dismantle this piece by piece. So I suppose for your listeners, yes, it may seem ridiculous, but it's quite serious and it's quite dangerous.
So despite the Supreme Court ruling, I've come across this in the civil service, in many of our universities, in the world of arts in particular, across much of the public sector, in fact, you have people who've taken it upon themselves because they're so convinced that their view is the only view you're allowed to have. They are literally defying the Supreme Court ruling, aren't they? I see that all the time in academia and the civil service. Do you still see that in the world of art and contemporary dance in particular, Rosie Kay?
Yes, absolutely, I do. It's kind of very sad, actually, because these people do think that they're right, but they're completely misguided. And it seems quite a harsh way to have to sort of deal with it with lawfare. But that is the way we're going to have to start and take some big cases. I think the fear of litigation and the costs of that hopefully should at least temper some of these kind of ideological fanatics. And hopefully people will get some decent advice and some decent HR advice. I think one of the worrying things is when you've got the subsidised sector, they don't seem to really care. And so we're going to have to look at the funders and the funding agreements to say you can't keep funding organisations that are unlawful.
Just finally, Rosie Kay, you are a world-class dancer. I'd say, having looked into your life and so on and got to know you a little bit, your reputation as a mentor and a kind of producer and a kind of artistic entrepreneur surpasses possibly even your reputation as a performer, if I may say so. Are you still getting joy from your art? Do you still think you can use your art to push forward ideas and concepts that you feel are important, or has this really knocked the wind out of you?
Well, the wonderful thing with dance is it takes a huge amount of sort of personal daily discipline, and getting back into the studio, doing my ballet bar every day, doing all my fitness and all the kind of stuff I have to do to kind of keep my body moving. I think that gives you like a real, literally a backbone.
Yeah. An inner core strength, if we may say.
That's right. Which is maybe
I'm not going to even
as
mention pelvic floors. Okay.
Exactly. Maybe not as strong as it used to be, but it certainly helps. And, there is a joy and a beauty in dance, which I've always found just like utterly mysterious, utterly endless, totally able to mine it. I've actually just started a martial arts course because I'm making a show.
Has it got that bad? Has it got that bad?
I'm making a show that looks at, I suppose it's called self-protection. So I thought, well, I better go and do it myself. And I've got this fabulous master and just like learning new skills, learning new physicalities. And maybe it's time in my life to actually use my body to fight. And that will combine both the dance and freedom in the arts. Maybe it's time to like be really, really ninja trained at last.
And what kind of political leadership do you want to see? Obviously, we've had incredible people, strong women in particular, speaking out. You've mentioned Sharon Davis, a huge friend of this podcast, Martina Navratilova, Tracy Edwards, the yachting legend who we've recently had on Planet Normal. So many
brilliant
people. What do you want to see our politicians do now, finally?
I do feel the arts need to wake up pretty quick, because if you look at what's happened in the US with the Trump administration, the arts could be very liable to just getting their subsidies cut entirely. And that would be a real tragedy, because we've always had quite a brilliant mixed subsidy commercial sector. And the subsidy sort of really creates the seed funding, the great ideas, nurtures the talent. And then the commercial sector really takes that and goes big. And, that's why we're important on the world stage.
But the subsidy is the seedbed often, isn't it, in the arts?
That's right. But that's the place that is like completely captured right now. And they're not listening. And so, yes, I'm speaking to all our political parties to say we really need to have a decent arts policy in the future. And the arts need to take a responsibility to respond to not just the public, but to their audience, which is the taxpayer, and not live in its own subsidised bubble. I think we've got to break this bubble culture, and we've got to listen to people like me that have been warning for the past 4 or 5 years.
Rosie Kay, warrior ballerina, campaigner extraordinaire. Great to have you on Planet Normal.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Liam.
Now, in a special report not from Planet Normal but Planet Earth, back in October, co-pilot Pearson joined the Pink Ladies protest in Westminster. The Pink Ladies are a group of women, mums, grandmothers, sisters, aunts and daughters who formed a network to take a stand against the impact of illegal migrant hotels on the safety of women and girls and communities up and down the country. Not just in migrant hotels, of course, but also in the so-called homes of multiple occupancy where illegal migrants are housed. Among the many women Alison spoke to was Susan Hall, leader of the Conservative group in the London Assembly, and a notable opponent of London Mayor Sadiq Khan. So here is co-pilot Pearson, rousing some dust outside Parliament with the protesting Pink Ladies.
Because women are concerned about the safety of other women and of their families. And I don't think the government is taking this seriously enough. There are so many undocumented men in the hotels, in the communities where these people live. They are concerned about their children and their grandchildren. These women are not serial demonstrators. Some of them, like me, have hardly ever been on a demonstration ever. But we must look after our own family. And that's what they're all about. You can see none of them are masked up. None of them, are violent. They just worry about their family, and that is why they're here.
We actually had Keir Starmer at the Labour conference yesterday, spraying the racism word around. We've got anti-racist protesters across the road. Is it too easy to describe these women as racist?
Of course it is. That's what it's all about. All through the mayoral contest, that's all Sadiq Khan ever did. He just kept trying to paint me as far right and racist, because that's what the left do. But you know what? They've done it so much now that nobody is taking any notice. Thank God, because to be called a racist is quite abhorrent. But because they're using it all the time now, it just doesn't have the same effect, and they don't know what to do about that.
And in fact, the Ethiopian man who was living in the Bell Hotel in Epping, 8 days after he came ashore across the channel, we know he did sexually assault an adult woman and a 14-year-old girl. So it was wrong to call them bigots.
Well, absolutely right. It's not the worst case scenario. It's actually happened. And this is what is upsetting, quite rightfully, all these mothers and people that are worried for their children. As you can see, we're all normal people. We are all concerned about hordes of young men from where we don't know, who perhaps have been brought up in cultures that do not respect women, and that is why we're all so concerned.
As a senior person in the Conservative Party, what would you want the Tories to do if they were in government about this situation?
Well, I accept unreservedly we should not have let so many people in. We need to stop this as quickly as we can. Saying you'll smash the gangs is fine if you've got a plan. But Keir Starmer has had no plan, and that's obvious to everybody. But putting so many of these young men in a place, I would like there to be detention centres. So the minute they come off the boat, they're putting in a detention centre where they are watched, where they're not allowed out. I mean, we'd have to leave the ECHR, fine, put them in a place where they cannot come out and deport them, because they have illegally broken into our country. So therefore, they should not be allowed to stay under any circumstances, any of them.
I'm in a sea of pink. Lots of women up from Epping in Essex, but also from across the country. Annie, where are you from?
Hampstead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm quite sheltered from mainly a lot of the problems, but I live in London, and I've lived in London for nearly 50 years, and it's become a hostile, horrible environment, really unpleasant. And there's reasons for the unpleasantness, and we have to clean it up, basically.
And what would you say the reasons for that unpleasantness are?
Reasons for the unpleasantness is that we're not allowed to live in our own country anymore. The country has become a place where it's like a puzzle that's been thrown up in the air, and none of the pieces fit anymore. And I just want the pieces to fit again the way they used to. And people need to fit in. That's all. Just fit in.
Do you agree with the pink ladies that women and girls are...
Absolutely. Terrified. I don't have a girl child. I have a male child. But if I had a girl child, she would be tethered to me. Tethered to me. This environment is not correct for a young girl. No, it's unpleasant. It's not right. It's not English.
What would you do about the migrant hotels?
Empty them. Put them in a detention center and deport them. They've got no business being here. They've come from France. They've come across waters, and they have decided to make a choice to come and park themselves in this country. I want them gone, all of them. All of them.
Also here today is Jess Gill, who brilliantly co-founded the Women's Safety Initiative. Jess, what are you doing at the Pink Ladies protest?
We're here to stand for our safety. Mass immigration is the biggest issue facing women today. You can see that most notably with the grooming gangs, with the Southport stabbing, with the Manchester Arena bombing, and also with the illegal migrants who are impacting the safety of schoolgirls, which is what the Pink Ladies was brought to be about. I've spoken to so many women over the past few months, and including at this protest, who understand that this is the biggest issue. They've had their own personal experiences. I've had my own personal experiences of it. But I've been followed on the street, I've been catcalled, I've been harassed. And the reality is, the elephant in the room is that it is immigration, and that's just the reality of it. And the other side, they don't have any response, because honestly, it's just so hard to argue against. Like, I think this is the biggest issue of our time. This is the biggest issue for women, and these fake feminists, they want to claim they're for women's rights. They're not. Otherwise, they'd be on our side.
Do you think it's the cultures that some of these guys are coming from that's a big problem?
Yeah, absolutely. The culture is a massive issue. I mean, what do you expect when you import men from these cultures which hate women, which have a strong prevalence of female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and just general misogyny where women have no rights? They have very limited safety. Femicide is through the roof. Like, what do you expect when they come over here and they're housed in these hotels and it's just men as well? Like, there's no other way to go about it. This is the obvious reason why this is happening. And I think it's such a shame that the establishment has ignored this and didn't see this was going to happen for so long. Just because they arrive in this country doesn't mean they'll just automatically adopt our values.
You've written very well about being out and about in London with a picnic with girlfriends, and then men just approaching you in a way that wouldn't have happened before.
Yeah, so that's the reason why I started the Women's Safety Initiative. Every single time I would go outside in London, something weird would happen. Like, it wouldn't be the most extreme thing most of the time, but there'd be, you know, men staring at me, men catcalling me, men following me. Even when we went to a picnic in Hampstead Heath, which is a relatively nice area of London, we had two men catcallers. We had a man literally sit right next to us, where our picnic blanket was. There was so much space around, but he sat deliberately next to us, stared at us for a whole 15 minutes, and then tried to make small talk. And even kept at it while, we obviously weren't interested in a conversation. And then I was walking back to the bus stop, and this man, he was beeping at me non-stop. It was so embarrassing. And again, I feel like this shouldn't be normalised, but when I've spoken out against it, and I've spoken to my friends, they all had similar experiences.
What would you like to see done about the migrant hotels?
I think they should all be closed, but I also think the illegal migrants should go back. And I also think anyone in this country who does not respect women, who come from these cultures which do not respect women, shouldn't be here, quite frankly, because it's a threat to women's safety.
What we're hearing is the voices of the Pink Ladies responding to a protest across the road just next to Downing Street by Stand Up to Racism. So it's not about racism, this protest?
Nothing about racism. I've worked for a charity for 43 years, over 3 boroughs, and I wouldn't have lasted that long. I've got an OBE from the Queen. She handed it to me. She would never have given me that if she would have thought I was racist. No, I'm not at all racist. I love everybody. But even these guys, they're fighting for what they believe in, okay? I don't hate them for what they believe in. But a lot of these, if you asked them to say, OK, take a couple of them guys home with you tonight, feed them, bath them, and keep them there, every single one of them would say, no, thank you.
Yeah,
you know.
So would you like them deported, the guys who are in the migrant hotel?
What I want to find out is how do you process somebody that doesn't have a history? They say, oh, we're going to process them, yeah? And then once they're processed, we decide whether they're legal and can stay. How do you process somebody, okay, that doesn't have a past, that can tell you they come from any country, that tells you they're a 15 with a full growth? I want to know how the government is going to process these people. I really do. And the history that they've got, okay? It's not just about the criminal that they've got, if they've got any past. they may have lots of illnesses, and our NHS won't be able to cope with it.
Yeah.
The infrastructure cannot cope, cannot cope with any more. And it's my simple way of saying, if you have a boat with 300 supplies and you put 600 on it, it'll sink.
We're joined by Orla Minahan, brilliant spearheader of this campaign, the Epping Ladies. Orla, what are you doing here today with all these amazing women?
Well, at the moment, I'm trying to get a generator to work so that we can do our speeches. But the women are here today because there have been so many protests up and down the country all summer, outside hotels. Nobody's listening. We decided to bring it here to Whitehall, and today the pink protest is the majority of people here are women, simply because many of them have never ever demonstrated or protested before, and we felt that by giving them something that they could come to with other women in the daytime, they'd feel safer, they'd feel it was a safer environment. So that's what we've tried to create today.
You were all called bigots, the women protesting outside the Epping Bell Hotel. But in fact, just recently, we've seen the Ethiopian man who did, in fact, sexually assault a girl, 14-year-old girl, and an adult woman. Did you feel vindicated?
Yes, absolutely. We did feel vindicated. There was a lot of upset about the fact that his sentence was quite short. But my view is, if they will then deport him after his sentence, then that will be worthwhile. To keep him any longer in a UK prison would be, I think, a bitter pill because of how much it would cost us, and that I just don't think that's on at all. I think that I believe that anybody who's a illegal immigrant who is arrested should be deported, not kept in our systems.
The judge in that case actually commented on this guy and his bad attitudes towards women, not knowing how to behave towards women. Isn't that a more general problem with the migrants coming here?
Absolutely. They come from, many of them from alien cultures. We fought very, very hard for hundreds of years for equal opportunities, and there is no way that women like us are going to tolerate that misogynistic culture coming into the UK. Absolutely not.
Where are we with the Bell Hotel now? How are you close to having some movement there?
I believe the 15th of October is the Supreme Court. We're back in court to get that shut down. It's over 3 days, I believe, and then we should know whether or not they're going to close it or keep it open. My view is if they close it, they need to move those men out of Epping, not into HMOs. But then I believe that that's the case across the country. Why these men should leave these hotels and be put into our community poses a bigger risk, and that does not help the situation at all. You know, put them in secure units or secure accommodation, process their asylum, and if they do not qualify, send them home. End of story.
Another returning Tory heavyweight to the Planet Normal cockpit during 2025 was the Right Honourable Suella Braverman MP, former Home Secretary and former Conservative leadership candidate. A noted Eurosceptic, Suella was also chair of the Commons European Research Group, a former Attorney General, and she's been MP for Fareham and Waterlooville since 2015. Born in northwest London to parents who'd come to Britain from Kenya and Mauritius respectively, Suella Braverman studied law at Cambridge and was called to the bar in 2005. In recent years, she's become a leading advocate of the UK leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, the subject of a paper she published with the Prosperity Institute. I started by asking Suella Braverman, at a time when her own party's position wasn't clear, if she felt that leaving the ECHR should be Tory party policy.
I've been wanting to hear this from the Conservative leadership for several years. I think I was one of the first sitting cabinet members or ministers of the last Conservative administration to come out publicly in favour of withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights back in 2022. I was received with a lot of criticism and backlash from my own colleagues at the time, but I'm very pleased that 3 years on, opinion seems to have shifted, and many of those same colleagues are now agreeing with me actually and have seen the light on this issue. That I think is absolutely essential that the Conservative Party makes an unequivocal commitment now that if it were to win the next general election, it will absolutely withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Give us some colour, Suella. What's it like to be Home Secretary when the UK is in the European Convention of Human Rights? Did you ever feel that the UK was over-interpreting the judgments from Strasbourg
lawyers?
Well, the turning point for me was the flights to Rwanda that were grounded effectively by judges who were sitting in the Strasbourg court, who applied a pretty opaque and dubious process in the form of Rule 39 interim orders, and who at the last minute overruled English courts to stop those flights from taking off to Rwanda. And that was really the death knell for the Rwanda scheme. Everyone will remember that moment. People were glued to their TV screens watching as to whether the flights would take off. And one by one, the migrants were taken off the plane because they were able to secure injunctions ultimately from the Strasbourg court. And that scuppered the whole plan, and that set off a whole spiral of legal cases and appeals and counter appeals that ended in the whole scheme collapsing, really. So, one of the big symptoms of our membership of the European Convention has been our inability to control our borders and stop the boats. That's one such problem. My report that I set out and published in July refers to many other policy areas where the convention has stymied the government's ability to deliver its democratic mandate.
Do you feel that the convention basically scuppered the Rwanda policy? Would you bring back the Rwanda policy now? Can you foresee Labour ever bringing back the Rwanda policy?
So I do think that it was our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, plus the Human Rights Act, and the extensive judicial review arrangements that we have in this country that all worked to block the Rwanda policy and ultimately defeat it. And so, as I set out, originally they stopped the flights from taking off. That was the first intervention, really, by the Strasbourg court. That was foreign judges in a foreign court applying the European Convention as they saw fit to stop a democratically elected government from entering into a legitimately negotiated arrangement with a third country, Rwanda. Following that, and through the appeals right up to the Supreme Court, the Rwanda scheme was found to be unlawful because it breached the obligations and the articles in the European Convention. And that's because of an overinterpretation of the European Convention combined with the Refugee Convention. But it's the real problem, and this is what I encountered as Home Secretary, was that the rights of illegal migrants, the rights of foreign paedophiles, the rights of foreign terrorists become more important under the European Convention of Human Rights than the rights of the law-abiding British majority. And so I was unable to deport foreign paedophiles, deport foreign terrorists, stop the boats, because they were able to all rely on mainly Articles 3, Articles 8, and other articles of the European Convention to stop the Home Office from deporting them.
Before we explore the convention and the mechanisms for leaving it, the implication of leaving it more fully, Suella Braverman, just tell us why it is that you think third country processing is so vital. Why do we need to process people not here in the UK?
I think it is the right model. And I think it is the right model because it's worked before. If you look at Australia largely solved their maritime migration problem. They had a problem of, as they called them, boat people illegally arriving on the shores and the beaches of Australia about a decade ago. They largely solved that problem through third-party processing, and they set up processing centres in Nauru and Papua New Guinea, and they were able to remove the illegal migrants upon their arrival on Australian territory to those places for processing and detention. That model worked because it provided the necessary deterrence, because it totally undermined the business model of the gangs and the objective that the illegal migrants and the people smugglers have, which is to get a foothold in the UK. And that's why the Rwanda model must be reinstated. The Rwanda plan must be resurrected under the next government. I very much hope Labour would do it, but I don't hold out much confidence that they will. They scrapped it on day one of their administration, and they criticised it vociferously when it was in place. So they're no fans of the Rwanda model, but it is absolutely the solution to this problem, because you have a willing partner where people will be treated humanely, they will be accommodated, they will be resettled in a country that wants them. And it also avoids the situation where you've got people coming from countries where it's difficult to return them back to.
Why do you think it's taken so long for your party to come round to your point of view, Suella? There's now a lot of speculation that the Tory leader will announce finally at party conference this autumn that a Conservative government would leave the ECHR. How has it taken so long, and what damage has been done by the delay?
Yeah, I think the delay is a big problem because I think it demonstrates reluctance and a lack of conviction. And that is the concern, I think. It feels as though the Conservative Party has been dragged kicking and screaming to this policy position against its will. And that's what worries me a little bit. The big problem for the Conservative Party, I think, at the moment is credibility. People don't believe us because we made promises for the best part of a decade to cut migration, to stop the boats, and we didn't deliver on those promises, to cut taxes as well. And so saying things is falling on deaf ears amongst the British electorate. They are cynical and they don't believe us. And I think the kind of institutional or political reluctance that the party seems to be demonstrating on this particular policy doesn't really help to resolve this credibility gap at the moment. I think there's also a very strong division of views within the Conservative Party. There are many members of Parliament and many members of the Conservative Party who don't support leaving the European Convention of Human Rights. They believe that the UK should be part of these globalist transnational organisations. They believe it's part of our international reputation. They think that, we'd be classed in the same group as Russia and Belarus if we were to withdraw. Totally nonsensical argument. And they also have a sense of deference to the international legalistic order. And I think that's been shown to be wanting in recent years. We're facing a global migration crisis. Neither the EU, in the form of EU law and the European Court of Justice, nor the European Convention on Human Rights and the Council of Europe and the Strasbourg Court have been able to deal sufficiently to enable democratically elected governments across Europe to curb this global migration crisis. Pretty much every European country is struggling it. When I was Home Secretary, I would meet with other European interior ministers. Without exception, they were all struggling with their number one crisis, which was illegal migration. Germany, France, my counterpart in Italy, Spain, all of them. And we would all share our war stories of dealing with it. And so the transnational European law / international law framework has utterly failed to deal with this global migration crisis. And I think that it's high time that some of us were brave and courageous and said that it's not working, it's outdated. These are structures that were formed in the immediate aftermath of World War II for a very different era, a different time, and for very different reasons. If you look, and my paper sets this out, the origins of the European Convention on Human Rights, and indeed the original script, is nothing that I would object to. It was born out of the tragedy of World War II, with the noble aspirations of wanting to prevent authoritarianism, fascism from taking root again, ever again in the continent. And the document itself, to which the UK was one of the first signatories, sets out obligations and duties with which I would not disagree. I don't think anybody sensible would disagree. The right to life, the right against torture, the right against inhumane treatment, the right to a private life. All of these are, universal rights. But what's happened is over the ensuing 50 years, the operation of a politicized and interventionist court, the various doctrines that have been applied by that court, and the very expansive nature of the court's jurisprudence has wholly undermined state sovereignty. And that's why, in a very similar way to the arguments around Brexit, it's just not sustainable, I believe, in terms of wanting to control your borders, control your laws, control your public order, to be part of such an organisation anymore.
You remain a member of the House of Commons, of course, Suella. What would you say to your fellow Tory MPs, the many of them who are really squeamish about leaving the ECHR? To what extent are they behind the curve when it comes to public opinion, when it comes to the shift that we've seen in the much cited Overton window in recent months? Are those colleagues Conservatives?
Listen, I respect people who disagree with me, and reasonable people will disagree on this subject. Learned people will disagree on this subject. Goodness, there are many experts and eminent lawyers who would disagree with me on this subject, and for good reasons. I do think, however, that times have changed, circumstances have changed, and we are in a crisis. We are facing a systemic and unprecedented crisis in our country when it comes to the unmatched levels of illegal migration. That's posing a national security threat. It's posing a public safety threat. It's fundamentally unfair. And we can't go on like this, where it's a free-for-all on our south coast and anybody can just break into our country in this way. We cannot go on that way. There have been many attempts to reform the ECHR from within. I set those out extensively in my paper. They've all failed. Tony Blair wanted to reform our membership. He failed. David Cameron tried to reform the ECHR from within. He failed. Rishi Sunak went up to Reykjavik, I think in Iceland, and said, I want to reform by working with you, to his Council of Europe members. It failed. So there have been good faith attempts to reform from within. They've all failed over the best part of a decade. It is not consistent with border control. And the other big policy area really makes me angry and sad about our membership of the European Convention is the outrageous treatment of our brave veterans who fought in Northern Ireland during the Troubles against the IRA. And many of those British soldiers at the time were following orders, were protecting the realm, Northern Ireland, against known terrorists. And decades later, some of those same soldiers are now elderly men, veterans, who are being persecuted and prosecuted and investigated for murder because of Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And there has been no end of inquiry and investigation and institutional witch hunt against some of these soldiers. Some of them have been under investigation 5 times. They've been acquitted, and yet they're still being chased through the courts because of Article 2. The European Convention and the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that the families of IRA terrorists have been entitled to compensation. There are some absurdities when it comes to some of these decisions. And so the case and the plight of some of our British veterans when it comes to Northern Ireland is, again, a very strong reason why we need to leave.
So you're a Cambridge-educated lawyer, Suella Braverman. I think you passed the New York bar exams as well. You've been Attorney General, you've been Home Secretary. No one could say you lack legal experience and expertise, Suella Braverman, KC, if I may say so. Tell me about Northern Ireland. You just mentioned Northern Ireland there in a different context. We've now had the likes of Jack Straw who, of course, was Home Secretary when the precious Good Friday Agreement was signed, saying that leaving the ECHR wouldn't unduly undermine the Good Friday Agreement. We've also had other Labour grandees, former Home Secretaries, not least Blunkett and Charles Clarke, saying we should leave the ECHR. So a two-pronged question, Suella. Why is it that you think the Good Friday Agreement will be okay? Because there's a lot of activist lawyers who are saying it won't be. And aren't the Tories in danger of being left behind? At this rate, Keir Starmer even could declare that the government will leave the ECHR before the Tories say so.
Well, if that does happen, I mean, I will eat my hat, as they say. It will be the most astonishing thing if Keir Starmer vows to leave the ECHR, because, of course, he was a human rights lawyer.
Yeah.
One of his best friend from Chambers is now the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, who again is
Are you a fan?
someone who how do I put this diplomatically? No, I'm not a fan. I think they're both ruining the country and our international standing.
Do you think a lot of human rights lawyers are just riding a gravy train, just got their hand out? They like all this lawfare stuff. It keeps them in clover.
Listen, I think I was a barrister. I didn't specialise in on the human rights side of things, but I did a lot of work for the Home Office, and I used to defend the Home Secretary in immigration cases in court for a period of several years, actually. And I was up against some of these lefty lawyers very often in court, and I saw that they were just doing their job mainly, but some of them have used the legal system as a campaigning tool as well, I would say. And I mean, immigration law is complex, but it's largely influenced by the Convention and human rights. And to a very high degree, the Home Office will lose its cases in court because of human rights. Illegal migrants will be able to claim human rights protections to prevent their deportation effectively, and they can game the system against the Home Office. So, this goes back to over a decade when I was a humble lawyer defending the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, in court. And it was listen, the English bar, the English legal profession, I think, is one of the best in the world. We produce very high caliber advocates. Courtroom advocacy is the real skill that the English legal system offers the world. But what's happened is, because of the expansive remit of judicial review in the last 30 or 40 years, it has become a campaigning vehicle. Our courts have become a means of campaigning for left-wing activists. I mean, Lord Sumption talks about this and writes about this eloquently in his Reef lectures, actually 2019. He talks about the empire of law, and he shows quite forensically how law, assisted and aided by human rights activists, has become hijacked, if you like, by campaigners and political operators. And in doing so, the role of democratically elected parliamentarians and the role of Parliament and parliamentary supremacy have all been undermined.
And just briefly, you do feel that ECHR exit won't undermine the Good Friday Agreement?
This is a really important issue, and this is why, again, my paper deals at length with this question, because it is a serious question and it needs a serious answer, because peace in Northern Ireland is incredibly important to the United Kingdom and to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland. And the short answer is no. Withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights will not undermine peace in Northern Ireland. It will not undermine the Good Friday Agreement. And there is a solution to resolving this question. Now, what I show in my paper, I go back over the origins and the evolution of the Good Friday Agreement, is that despite some people saying that the Good Friday Agreement is sacrosanct, set in stone, and refers to the European Convention on Human Rights and therefore cannot be touched, it is very much the case that the Good Friday Agreement has been changed substantively on many occasions in the last 10, 20 years. The Windsor Framework is the most recent significant change to the workings of the Good Friday Agreement. It breaches the kind of very important principle of consent, you could say. In many ways, the Northern Ireland Protocol is a massive breach of the Good Friday Agreement. David Trimble, the late Lord David Trimble, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, was a big critic of the Northern Ireland Protocol, saying that it ran a horse and cart through the Good Friday Agreement. And yet, peace has been maintained. So there have been many, many changes. And those are just the most recent changes. There have been many reiterations, revisions, changes, all enacted in Parliament to the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And therefore, I say that going forward, if and when the UK leaves the European Convention on Human Rights, it should amend the Good Friday Agreement and change some of those references to the ECHR, which are contained in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And it can do that through negotiation. And it can also do that unilaterally by changing the terms of the Northern Ireland Act. And that is all within the gift of a sovereign UK Parliament. We must ensure that we don't have, to coin the phrase, a two-tier human rights system within the United Kingdom. If the UK is to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, the whole of the UK must leave the orbit of Strasbourg Court. We cannot leave Northern Ireland in a fudge. We can't repeat some of the mistakes of the Northern Ireland Protocol. We cannot leave the Strasbourg Court with an overarching jurisdiction over Northern Ireland, but the rest of the Great Britain under a different regime. The whole of the UK must be under the same human rights regime. That's important.
And finally, what's the view in the Braverman household towards reform? You've been touted as a possible defectee to reform. Your husband, of course, was famously a member of reform in his own right. Obviously, you have complete autonomy in your household, political independence. But what is the story with the Bravermans and reform, Suella? Give us a little insight into, I won't ask you about pillow talk, but discussions over coffee in the morning.
Well, listen, I mean, my husband has his own views. You'd have to ask him what his particular opinion is on any given day, for my part. He was a member of Reform and he left, so he had some disagreements with them. But listen, I mean, we can't ignore the polls. Reform is doing very well at the moment.
He's probably going to be Prime Minister, isn't he?
Well, listen, I mean, it's a very early point in the political cycle. I'm not one for making bold predictions like that at this stage, but I cannot ignore the polls. I cannot ignore what people tell me. I get hundreds of messages a day in my inbox. I meet lots of people all over the country. And what I cannot ignore, and this is what I saw at the general election and in the run up to it, is that many, many lifelong Conservatives are feeling, they're feeling disillusioned. They're feeling like they don't believe the Conservative Party anymore. They feel very, very let down on immigration. That's the main issue. They feel, and it's not necessarily illegal immigration, it's actually legal migration, where despite Brexit, despite promise after promise to cut the numbers, the Conservative government actually exponentially increased the number of work and study visas.
One last chance, is it, for the Tories to get this right, as far as you're concerned?
Listen, this is a very difficult time for the Conservative Party. We're still in the immediate aftermath of that devastating defeat last year. And it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take time and steady leadership to regain the trust of millions of people. And time will tell. Time will tell whether that is doable. For now, we will have to be happy soldiers and try our best to serve our constituents, which is what I'm doing.
Suella Braverman, thanks a lot for appearing on Planet Normal.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on this latest edition of Planet Normal. Alison and I will be back with the very latest news and views from beyond the bubble next week on Thursday the 22nd of January. In the meantime, keep the emails rolling in to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Planet Normal, we jolly well hope you have, please subscribe and leave a review and a rating wherever you listen.
And as we speed away from our beloved planet Normal and the madness of planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers Cass Ho, James Hodgson and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.